What happens when one woman's voice shatters the silence of a Supreme Court justice's secrets? In a single moment, Elizabeth Harper unveils $170,000 in hidden deals, a flag of rebellion, and a truth so explosive it leaves the nation speechless. Stay tuned. This is the confrontation that changed everything. In front of a breathless audience of 12 million, Elizabeth Harper pins Justice William Carter with undeniable proof. $170,000 worth of unreported luxury vacations, gifts, and perks, all linked to litigants in his courtroom. As she steps closer and questions, "Are you loyal to the Constitution or a political sect?" Carter freezes, mute. No rebuttal, no excuse, just the echo of a Supreme Court titan foldering on live television. What words did Elizabeth wield to unmask America's most influential judge? Keep watching. This tale demands your full attention. The lamps in room 2141 blazed with sterile intensity, throwing stark shadows over the gleaming oak table. At its heart lay a hefty, bulging dossier, 619 pages long, emblazoned with the stark title, Justice or Privilege. The atmosphere crackled, poised like the instant before a jury's decision. Nobody uttered a word. Nobody stirred. Cameras captured every inhale. Then came the crisp tap of heels, steady, resolute. Elizabeth Harper strode in, gaze locked ahead, posture unyielding, clad in severe black, a signal of warning rather than welcome. She ignored the onlookers. She had no need for their glances. She embodied their voice now, sharp, driven, relentless. Moments later, Justice William Carter appeared. His aura radiated unchallenged privilege, the sort never doubted. He didn't merely sit. He reclined in his chair, a king reclaiming his crown. With a faint sneer, he surveyed the chamber and declared, "Don't mistake politics for justice. This is mere theatrics." No senator responded. The chairs facing him stood vacant until Elizabeth acted. She drew back her seat with slow precision, each gesture quiet yet thunderous. Settling in, she locked eyes with Carter, unwavering. "No," she stated, her tone soft but piercing. "This isn't a stage. It's a judgment day. Today, this chair speaks for those you've sought to mute." Carter eased back, but the room's energy had shifted. When silence reclaimed room 2141, heavy, charged, pulsing with the gravity of her words, Elizabeth didn't let it dissolve. She seized it, letting it linger just long enough to align every pulse in the room. Then she leaned forward, her voice quieter, softer, yet undeniably keener. "Do you know when your name first reached my ears, Justice Carter?" she inquired, not pausing for a reply. "It wasn't at law school. It wasn't in a courthouse. It wasn't even on a broadcast, not in the way you'd expect." She halted, letting the stillness settle once more. It was in a cramped kitchen, its linoleum floor peeling, a lone window staring at a brick barrier. My mother stood by the sink, clutching a dish, eyes on the TV, as the Dobbs ruling broke. When your name was cited as the pen behind that decision, the one that struck down Roe, my mother let the plate slip from her hands. It broke, and something within her shattered too. Elizabeth rose, deliberate and slow, as if the recollection warranted the dignity of standing tall. She didn't weep like a movie heroine. There was no theatrics, no screams, just a quiet, devastating collapse. Her face folded, as if she'd learned of a death. In a sense, she had. She'd fought her whole youth for a cause she thought I'd never need to battle. With one flourish of your pen, you dragged that struggle back into our home, unbidden, undeserved, utterly indefensible. Her voice held steady, though her jaw clenched. She murmured, "I'm sorry. I thought we'd one more time," she recounted. The chamber stayed still. No rustle, no breath. That's when your name etched itself in my mind, not from a legal text, but from a scar. She let the memory hover briefly, then exhaled, not to shed the pain, but to clear space for the truth to come. Perhaps that's the sharpest lens on who we are, Elizabeth said, her stare fixed on Carter. You emerged from halls of influence, taught that the law was yours to mold. I grew up in streets where the law was a caution sign. She adjusted the worn folder before her, its edges frayed from handling. You preside in the nation's highest court, enveloped by aides, marble, and hush. I hail from a house where hush spelled dread, where your rulings resound loudest in places like mine. Her tone grew solid, not louder, like tempered steel. You studied in ivy-draped halls, where doors parted before you reached them. I navigated public schools with faulty heaters and exhausted teachers who showed us justice wasn't meant for girls like me. Yet we pursued it regardless. She paused, letting the weight settle. You craft opinions in secluded chambers. I draft laws in rooms packed with skeptics who doubt my place there. She motioned to the hearing space. You've never had to justify your position. I've fought for mine every day. Then, without breaking eye contact, she delivered a truth, soft but razor-edged. You shield a structure designed for the elite. I strive for those it was meant to overlook. She held his gaze, unblinking. She lifted a small remote from the folder beside her, speaking with a calm more lethal than rage. Let's shift from stories to evidence, Elizabeth said, her voice even, purposeful. Unlike my mother, some never face the law's betrayal. Some soar above it, quite literally. The light softened, and the vast screen behind her sparked to life. What appeared wasn't conjecture or opinion, it was footage. The opening shot, a sleek Gulf Stream touching down on a slim airstrip slicing through Montana's snow. The lens zoomed, time-stamped 2008, verified by FAA logs. Next, a sweeping view of a high-end fishing retreat, $1,000 a night, press barred, entry by exclusive invite. Then the frame that froze the room. Justice William Carter stood shin-deep in pristine waters, fishing rod idle, grinning beside billionaire financier Edward Marshall, both in matching waders, exuding the ease of men untouched by repercussions. Elizabeth let the picture hang, then clicked again. The screen displayed a document, sealed with the U.S. Supreme Court's emblem, titled boldly, Cases Involving Edward Marshall or Related Entities, 2008 through 2021. 10 entries, 10 distinct cases. Her voice returned, composed but incisive. Edward Marshall, who funded your flight, housed you in Montana, offered lodging and meals, is connected to at least 10 matters before this court. You took part in all 10. Your votes in each advanced his financial empire. She stepped nearer, her heels click the sole sound in the hall. No transparency, no withdrawal. Just rulings that reshaped global debt markets, sovereign immunity, and enforcement powers, earning billions for the man who took you fishing. Her words slowed, deepened. What did the public gain from that retreat? Nothing. Not a single note in your disclosure forms. She set the remote down, firm as a judge's hammer. Justice Carter, you didn't merely fracture public faith. You made impartial justice a private deal. The chamber fell silent. No one budged. For the first time, Carter's smirk vanished. This wasn't politics or showmanship, it was evidence, and it bit deep. The screen faded to black, but the image of Carter with Marshall burned in every mind. The quiet stretched, taut, until Carter himself spoke. His hands loosely clasped, his tone deliberate yet patronizing. Friendship isn't a crime, he said, each word measured. We fished. Nothing more. His voice held no remorse, no pause, only the assurance of a man above accountability. I concealed nothing. It was a private trip, entirely within the law. He paused, glancing at the press as if to assert his fearlessness to the nation. Then the clincher. "A man enjoying nature isn't up for auction," Carter said, his lips curling into a thin, empty smile. "Honestly, Congresswoman, I'm troubled that leisure is now branded as corruption." He adjusted his nameplate, as if poise could dismiss the evidence's weight. In one move, he tried to shrink 10 votes, billions in outcomes, years of secrecy, and eroded trust into a weekend angling trip. But the room's shock wasn't just his defense, it was his delivery. No nod to the power disparity, no grasp of appearances, no sense that a justice accepting lavish trips from a litigant isn't just about legality, it's about fairness. At that moment, every worker watching, every single parent denied a hearing, every veteran refused an appeal, saw the reality clearer than any opinion could state. Some don't break laws because the system parts for them silently. As Carter's argument dissolved into the quiet it spawned, Elizabeth didn't push. She didn't have to. The truth was already at work. She turned to the seat beside her, eyes sharp with calm determination. "We now summon our next witness," she said, her words sparking like flint on tinder. A murmur stirred the hall. Then the back door creaked open, slow, intentional, revealing a figure. They wore a plain black suit, hands clasped tightly, a lapel mic altered to mask their voice. Cameras were barred from their face. Their placard read, "Former Supreme Court Clerk, 2010 to 2015. The witness sat, tense yet composed, their restraint born not of fear, but of years knowing what to withhold. "I served under Justice Carter for 3 years, their voice began, steady, altered, but human. I handled filings, drafted initial memos, oversaw ethics briefings. In 2012, I noted a conflict tied to Edward Marshall's stake in a sovereign debt case on our docket. They drew a copy of the original cautionary memo from a folder and laid it on the desk. That memo never reached the ethics panel. It was intercepted, erased from the internal flow. The room's mood shifted, not with sound, but with a collective awareness of something irrevocable. Several of us raised concerns, discreetly, cautiously, knowing the environment. We were warned not to question the bench's honor or jeopardize our legal careers. The witness paused, a slight tremor in one hand, then a fist. But honor isn't silence. What I saw wasn't neutrality. It was protection. The institution didn't just overlook warnings, it buried them. The air transformed, no longer formal or partisan. This was intimate, because it was proof the decay wasn't theoretical. It had documents, witnesses, names. Senators stared, unmoving. Reporters stilled their phones. The witness closed with one line, flat but seismic. Justice Carter wasn't shielded for his innocence. He was shielded because admitting his fault would have cracked the court's myth. No one spoke. The illusion had fractured. The witness's words still hung heavy, their truth reverberating through the room's core. But Elizabeth didn't let it fade. She advanced again, not with force, but with a poise like pressure behind fortified glass. "Now," she said, her voice low, intentional, "we must address something graver than silence. Symbols." From her binder's side pocket, she drew a photo mounted on sturdy board. With a judge's solemnity, she turned it face up on the table. The image struck like a dam bursting. Projected in sharp detail behind her was a color photo, stamped January 17th, 2021, of a Maryland lakeside estate under the Carter Family Trust. The focus wasn't the house, but the flag above its porch, white, bearing a pine tree and "Appeal to Heaven," the banner waved by Capitol rioters on January 6th, now tied to Christian nationalism, extremism, and calls to topple democracy. Elizabeth let the image stand, unadorned. No theatrics were needed. The truth carried its own weight. "This wasn't an error," she said, each syllable precise. "Not a prank, not a stray breeze catching fabric. This flag at your estate was no accident. It was a declaration." She fixed her eyes on Carter. "It flew as the nation grieved 5 lost lives, as this court deedied to hear cases linked to that rebellion." She inhaled, not for pause but to strike deeper. "You're not merely a jurist, Justice Carter. You're a guardian of the Constitution. When someone of your stature displays a symbol tied to the worst assault on our democracy in recent history, it's not just an opinion. It undermines this institution's integrity." Her voice tightened, steady. "This flag is claimed by those who reject elections, who view law as a hurdle, not a shield. Its presence at your home gave them validation, license." She turned to the chamber, addressing not just lawmakers, but the cameras, the people. "This isn't about party lines. It's about perception, power. Whether the nation's highest court remains impartial or has been quietly claimed by those who see the Constitution as their own." Her final words landed like a closing plea, not loud, but indelible. When insurrection's symbols fly at justices' homes, the crisis isn't beyond these walls. It's within them. No one stirred. In that silence, America watched, not for her next words, but for any possible reply. The flag on the screen needed no elaboration. Its intent was clear, its weight inescapable. Elizabeth didn't glance at it. She stared at the man who allowed it, now under oath before a nation questioning if justice's keepers still grasped its meaning. Her voice, low, cut like a blade. "Justice Carter," she said, her tone sparking like steel on stone. "Do you uphold the Constitution or a political creed dressed as patriotism?" It wasn't drama. It was a charge. The question didn't blame. It demanded accountability. In a heartbeat, the room saw a shift, not in Elizabeth, but in him. Carter's posture stiffened, his lips a tight line, no longer neutral. He leaned forward, not to dominate, but to deflect, for the first time that day. His voice broke the quiet, sharp and forced. "That," he said, louder than needed, "is private. My home, my wife, my family. It's irrelevant to my work on this bench." It wasn't just his words, it was their delivery. Rushed, fragile, too practiced to persuade. His once steady demeanor cracked under one question's weight. His hands, once calmly folded, clutched the desk's edge. A man grasping authority by reflex, not right. In that instant, Elizabeth needed no further words. The room saw her revelation. Beneath legal tradition, the robe, the ancient bench, was a man unable or unwilling to clarify if his ultimate allegiance was to the public or something narrower, more perilous. The issue transcended the flag. It was whether the robe still held trust. The chamber hadn't recovered from Carter's heated rebuttal. His voice had faltered under strain, his polished facade slipping just enough. But Elizabeth didn't counter with anger. She countered with precision, her constant weapon. Not volume, not disorder, but accuracy. She turned from Carter calmly, as if his response was anticipated, and spoke to the panel with clear composure that cut deeper than any accusation. "Honorable members," she said, "I request to submit a verified, time-stamped audio, sealed until this moment, into the record." The lights dimmed as a technician swiftly prepared the file. No visuals appeared, only a glowing waveform pulsing softly on a dark screen. Elizabeth stepped back from the microphone, hands folded. This was captured at a private fundraising event in Sonoma County last February. The speaker wasn't sworn in, but he stood among donors, clergy, and figures linked to cases before this court. She let the context settle. Then came the unmistakable voice. Carter's. Raw, Unguarded, a man unaware history was listening. Enough pretending we're neutral. The other side fights hard. We can't afford to sit idle anymore. The room stirred. Small shifts, a turned head, a tightened jaw. A pen stilled mid-note. We're not just parsing laws now. We're defending the nation's core, the one we were raised to believe in. A pause on the recording. Faint chuckles, clinking glasses, the soft buzz of wealth and ease. This is a cultural battle, and we must stop shying from it. We're right, they're wrong, and we must prevail. That last line didn't linger. It exploded. The audio ceased. The waveform vanished into silence, but the chamber's silence deepened, hardened, pressing against the walls. Carter didn't move. His jaw locked, lips a defiant line. He said nothing. What could he say? This wasn't hearsay or spin. It was him, recorded, drawing lines of conflict behind neutrality's cloak. Elizabeth stepped forward, slower now. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her power came from delivering truth fearlessly, letting its weight carry. That, she said softly, is the voice of a man judging 330 million lives, sworn not to any cause or creed, but to the Constitution. Yet there, he wasn't championing law. He was pledging to a side. She faced the senators, her words aimed beyond the room. What happens when a justice sees himself not as a judge, but a warrior in a cultural crusade? When us versus them shapes how the Constitution is read. Who gets rights? Who gets rulings? No one cut in. Not the chair. Not opponents. None dared. She pressed on. The threat isn't just the audio. It's that it proves what many fear. The bench isn't blind. It doesn't balance evenly. Its decisions stem not from reason, but from private beliefs shared with those who pay for influence. Her voice lowered, sharpened. When justices speak like commanders, the court becomes a tool. It ceases to be democracy's final safeguard and joins the wreckage. The silence wasn't passive. It was tense, alive. Cameras refocused. Microphones seemed to strain, as if every breath counted. Carter, usually stoic, was visibly unsteady, his knuckles pale against the desk. He looked at Elizabeth, not with command, but with calculation, weighing if speaking would worsen his plight. She didn't offer him the chance. "Justice Carter," she said, turning fully to him, "you weren't elected. You were appointed. You don't serve a faction. You serve a principle, that above all causes, clans, or politics, this nation is ruled by laws crafted to protect everyone." She stepped closer, eyes locked. "So I ask again, when you say we must win, who is we?" Millions of Americans, not sharing your beliefs, politics, or privilege, stand before your court. They don't need your victory. They need your ear. The room didn't explode. It contracted, like lungs drawing cold air after smoke. It wasn't just the audio. It was what it confirmed, the hidden truth behind solemn robes, the fear that rulings weren't merely written, but wielded. Beyond the chamber, newsrooms shifted gears, headlines sharpened, anchors dropped caution. This wasn't a hearing. It was a confrontation. At its heart stood an unyielding voice, a congresswoman, a black woman, a daughter of Virginia, daring to question if justice's scales were skewed by hands sworn to keep them steady. The room hadn't exhaled since the audio stopped. The silence wasn't shocked now. It was foundational, pressing the walls like a quake's prelude. Then Carter leaned in, his voice cutting, pushed through gritted teeth. His morning's calm was gone. "You think one spliced recording qualifies you to challenge this court?" he snapped, each word escalating. "You're a rookie congresswoman, barely through one term. You don't get to lecture someone who's upheld the law for decades." His words weren't reason. They were hierarchy, a rebuke, a penalty, a warning. But Elizabeth didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She took the hit without recoiling, not because it didn't sting, but because she'd felt such blows before. From men like him, courts like his. She stood slowly, not with rage, but with something older than pride, nearer to truth. "You're correct," she said, her voice clear, steady. "I'm new here. I haven't penned rulings that redefined legal doctrine. I haven't sat on lofty benches or flown on private jets. I wasn't born to power. I carved my path, one closed door at a time." She retrieved a slim folder, its edges worn, carried for years. Her hands were steady as she opened it. Her voice stayed level. "But I know the law, Justice Carter. Not from above, not from polished desks or grand chambers. I know it from below, where it lands when misused, where it breaks what can't be fixed." She laid a single paper on the table, sliding it for cameras to see. "This is my mother's 1996 federal indictment. Wrong name, wrong charge, right zip code. A mistake that skips those with lawyers on call." She tapped the paper's edge, a quiet reminder. She served 5 years for a crime she didn't commit. Lost her work, her home, her voice. I was 12, watching the law strip everything from the woman who taught me to read. The room froze. Court reporters paused their keys. She got no hearing like this. No national spotlight. No mercy. Just precedent from a case your court wouldn't reconsider, as the error wasn't constitutional. Elizabeth met his eyes. No scorn, just memory. When she returned, it was in silence, not from guilt, but because the system had priced her worth. Her voice strengthened. "So, no, I may not know writing the law, but I know living it, bearing it, carrying its weight without armor. I know what happens when the law forgets its purpose." She drew a deep breath, her voice unwavering. "I know the law, Justice Carter, because it tried to erase my mother. It tried to teach me silence was safer than defiance. I had to claw for every right your decisions pushed just beyond reach." No applause came. None was needed. The moment wasn't for triumph. It was for truth, delivered precise and pure. In that truth, the robe opposite her seemed frailer. The folder lay on the desk, its pages marked by time, injustice, memory. Elizabeth's fingers lingered briefly before closing it gently, as if safeguarding her mother's pain from the next truth surge. She looked up, not only at Carter, but at the room, the nation beyond the lenses. Her voice returned, not raw or fervent, but surgical. "Now," she said with calm weight, "let's discuss something less personal, more public." She reached for a second binder, thick, pristine, bound in navy with a gold seal. "IRS Disclosures, Supreme Court Entities, 2007 to 2023. She opened it with a vault-keeper's care and a knower's confidence. "This," she said, raising the first page, "is what you kept hidden." A projector hummed, the screen igniting, not with theories but with proof. First, a catering bill from a Sonoma retreat, $18,420 for a weekend meal for under a dozen. Carter's name scrawled on the RSVP list in cursive. Then a hotel record, $7,800 for 3 nights at a private mountain estate, paid not by Carter, but by a fund tied to Edward Marshall's advocacy group. Then jet fuel costs, $42,000 for a DC to Aspen round trip, split by 2 undisclosed donors, one with a case before the court the next term. Elizabeth turned the page. Private transport, wine deliveries, cufflinks engraved with WC, a gift, per an internal note, from a group pushing religious labor exemptions. She let the figures speak. Then her words followed. "These aren't mere costs," she said, firm, unyielding. "They're entry points, Each dollar a key, each bill a door unlocked for those who know how to pay and whisper. She tapped a highlighted line. You never listed these on disclosure forms. Not once, not for travel, not for rulings, not when those funding your perks had cases before you. She faced the committee, pages falling like accusations. We expect judges to be human, not purchased, not entering courtrooms already owing favors. Her voice rose, not in anger, but in chilling clarity, undeniable evidence laid bare. From the binder's back, she drew a final memo from a judicial conference whistleblower, dated 6 months prior, listing 6 unreported events tied to Carter, totaling over $170,000 since 2010. None disclosed, all marked as gifted services, all from parties with court interests. She raised the paper briefly, then set it center table, like a judge's final decree. Her voice was sharp, final. You haven't dispensed justice, Elizabeth said, eyes on Carter, words forged in iron. You've leased it, billing the American public's trust. The line struck like a gavel's crack. She didn't shout, but the silence roared. No one moved, no one wrote. Cameras stilled. Carter paled, not from fear, but calculation, unsure what words wouldn't worsen his fall. Elizabeth didn't grant him room to try. Every decision you made while taking secret luxury trips is stained, she continued. Not because they were wrong, but because the public can't know if they were yours or bought by those pouring your wine, murmuring legal strategies. Her gaze swept the room. Senators, aides, reporters, citizens. This binder doesn't charge illegality. It charges disconnection from those your rulings impact, from the ethics your robe should embody, from the truth that justice isn't yours to barter. She stepped back. The binder stayed open, receipts glaring like wounds. The silence shifted, not just in the room, but in the air. This wasn't only Carter's actions. It was what the system let him think he could evade. He was answered, not with fury or vengeance, but with proof and a truth that burned. He hadn't judged the law. He'd invoiced it, leaving Americans to pay. The final page lay exposed under the lights, still as stone. The room felt paused, sound banished, gravity heavier with each silent second. Elizabeth stood unmoving, eyes forward, silent because no more needed saying. The binder of concealed receipts gaped like a scar, its pages silent witnesses. At the table's far end, Justice William Carter sat, frozen. The silence wasn't strategic or thoughtful. It was dazed. His fingers, once knit with a man certain of his rank, hung midair, lost. His jaw tightened, but no words emerged. For the first time in nearly 20 years on the bench, William Carter was speechless, and America watched. From the gallery, journalists leaned in, pens stilled, screens dim, unsure if they saw history or ruin or both. Cameras' red lights blinked, capturing every emotional flicker. Carter's eyes roamed, not with poise but with evident reckoning, from the press wall to the lawmakers' rows to the woman opposite, who'd bared his vulnerability, not with rage, but with facts. He reached for his glass, then withdrew before contact, a nervous tick, a man abruptly aware of every move. His shoulders lifted as if to muster a defense. None came. His gaze dropped to the folder before him, to the figures, invoices, and the silence binding them like a trap. Elizabeth hadn't stirred since laying down the last document. She stood tall, eyes fixed on him. Her face held no victory, only a certainty more perilous to power. I didn't just reveal your deeds. I've shown why you can't justify them. The committee chair stayed mute. No throats cleared. Even the vent's hum seemed to hush. Nationwide, Americans pressed closer to screens, TVs, phones, streams, watching the robe unravel. Some had doubted her, many expected drama. But none, not even her staunchest foes, foresaw this. A justice faced with evidence so exact, so damning, he couldn't muster a defense. The wall clock ticked once. No words, no breath, no denial. Outside the Capitol, live anchors stumbled into stunned silences. Online clips of Elizabeth's line, "You didn't judge justice, you leased it," raced globally. Some translated it, others scored it with music. But in this procedural chamber, it wasn't a quip. It was a judgment, leaving the judiciary's mightiest figure mute. Carter's lips parted, then sealed. His face, once judicial granite, was humanly frail, uncertain, exposed, trapped not by politics, but by evidence. It wasn't one trip, one bill, or one vote. It was what went unspoken until now. The power to shape law had been quietly woven with influence, ease, and unchecked privilege. Someone had dared name it, not from protest lines, but across the table, with proof. Elizabeth broke her stare, not to retreat, but to let silence seal what truth began. She closed the disclosure binder gently. Then she looked to the chair, to the nation. "Let the record show," she said evenly. Justice Carter has opted not to reply. No spite, no glee, just facts finality. In that moment, power's balance rewrote itself, not in law, but in the air. She held the stage. He held silence. A faint exhale escaped Carter, audible in the room's vault-like hush. His eyes, now glassy, fixed on no one, not Elizabeth, the chair, or the press. They drifted between realization and denial, as if half of him grasped the shift, half clung to past scandals fading. But this wouldn't fade. Not now. It wasn't cloaked in gossip or legalese, not dismissed by prestige. It was exposed by a woman he deemed junior, unfit, beneath legal weight. A woman who didn't shout or pound the table, but lifted receipts and let the nation judge. And it did. Live, across every screen, stream, text, and ticker. This wasn't a hearing. It was a Titan's fall, built behind columns and robes, now cornered by truth in a room too bright for lies. In the silence, justice gazed back, not blind or abstract, but human, clear, fearless for the first time in decades. The quiet gripped like a vice, but Elizabeth didn't let it stagnate. She refused to let this moment drown in red tape or fatigue. She stepped forward once more, not with a closing, but a verdict yet unvoiced. The binder lay shut behind her, its receipts damage done. Carter sat still, rhetoric drained, exposure's weight outstripping his title. Yet Elizabeth's voice didn't swell with victory. It sharpened, demanding focus, not cheers. "This isn't about one person," she said, her eyes sweeping the bench, the nation beyond. "It's about a question we've dodged too long. What happens when those who define the law think they're beyond it?" A hush fell, not from apathy, but from nearing an irreversible edge. "Justice isn't a rank," she continued. "It's a pact between the powerful and those who endure their rulings." Her voice deepened, stance firm. That pact is broken, not in theory or jargon, but in every unrecused vote, every hidden gift, every time comfort trumped accountability. She paused, not for herself, but for the room's need. Then, stepping forward, she rested her hand on the table, anchoring her words like a carved oath. "We can't force your resignation today, Justice Carter," she said, voice resonant. "But we can make this nation pause its distractions and see what festers behind power's veil." The tension snapped, not with gasps, but a shift. Stone-faced lawmakers leaned in. Reporters stopped typing, staring. The press pool rose, not by rule, but instinct. Something final had been said, not from the chair, but from a woman standing unpermitted, yet authoritative. Then came the line that would echo across America's screens, phones, records, memories. "Justice," Elizabeth said, voice quivering with restraint, is not a title etched in marble. It's the silenced, rising through those bold enough to hear. The room stilled, then stood. Chairs scraped, first one, then many, then all. Lawmakers, aides, press rose, not signaled, but knowing this wasn't a hearing's end. It was a new dawn. Applause began softly but grew. Not a roar, but a pledge. Unwritten, unvoted, felt. A vow that old rules, where robes hid corruption, where rank silenced reckoning, were breaking. Live. Carter sat, eyes lowered, not defiant, just unprepared. Elizabeth didn't bask in applause. She didn't bow. She stepped back, collected her notes, and left the mic with the quiet grace of one who'd said precisely what was needed. No more. Next morning, before tourists filled the Capitol Rotunda, a guard entered room 2141 at 6:42 a.m. and stopped. High on the left wall, amid portraits of justices, hung a framed oil of William Carter, painted 5 years prior. Solemn, stately. By 7:15 a.m., it was gone. No statement, no release, just a blank wall and the quiet of an institution catching up to public conscience. By noon, Elizabeth's closing words flooded networks, looping on CNN, MSNBC, even conservative channels unsure how to frame it. It wasn't partisan. It wasn't policy. It was a moral break, felt by all. Her quote was shared by senators, scholars, scrawled on protest signs outside the court by dusk. Hashtags sprang up, united. Marble is not justice. Silenced voices. Harper spoke truth. Editorials surged. Some crowned Elizabeth a herald of judicial reform. Others, cautious, urged a binding ethics code for the court. In homes, classrooms, law schools, one question echoed. How long had this persisted? Why did one woman, without robe or gavel, dare say what others wouldn't? In Richmond, a woman sat on a faded couch in a small apartment, Elizabeth's speech replaying on TV. She didn't weep or shout. She nodded once, whispering, "That's my girl." Her name was on the 1996 indictment Elizabeth had shown. By week's end, Congress received 2.4 million emails demanding judicial ethics hearings. Protests hit state courts from Denver to Atlanta. Professors issued open letters. Watchdogs pushed petitions. A Brooklyn mural emerged overnight. White letters on black. Justice isn't marble, it's memory. The clearest shift came not from news or hashtags, but the court. At the next oral argument's end, as justices rose, one chair stayed empty. No reason given. Justice Carter was absent. He'd return, yes, but his shadow had changed. Untouchability was gone. Elizabeth skipped press tours and book deals. She returned to her office Monday, met by flowers, letters, voicemails from phones ringing all night. She stayed her course, never chasing fame. She'd come to hold the system to its vow. She did, not with screams or revenge, but with truth too clear to ignore, even by the nation's highest bench. The gavel never fell, but the impact landed. Long after applause faded and the room emptied, ripples began. Soft, steady, undeniable. In the Supreme Court's marble stronghold, where time slowed and tradition hardened faster than truth, a crack formed. It didn't topple the structure or its pillars, but it altered how people moved through it, whispered, recalled that day in room 2141. Clerks noted he avoided the main rotunda. The justice's cafeteria quieted when he entered. Some nodded from duty. Others avoided his gaze. Those once drawn to his sway now stepped back, wary of the tide. Beyond the court, it wasn't scandal, but a national mood shift. Editorials turned from defense to reform. Legal blogs mapped unreported trips like crime scenes. Law deans faced student emails. Why no courses on judicial ethics enforcement? Panels formed. Syllabi changed. Supreme Court accountability became a lecture, not a concept. The portrait outside the hearing room, Carter's oil likeness in robes, was removed. No plaque marked its absence, but the wall felt different. Lighter, some said. Truer, others claimed. An Illinois visitor told a reporter, "It's like they cleared space for someone who deserves it." The Senate Judiciary Committee, often stalled and powerless, faced a surprise. Hope. Thousands of letters, handwritten, digital, from veterans, single parents, defenders, ex-inmates, began. I never thought it'd be said aloud. Legislation stirred, not fast, not unopposed, but moving. The Judicial Transparency Act, once mocked as show, gained bipartisan support. It didn't demand impeachment or name Carter. It sought equal disclosure standards for the court, enforceable ethics, public recusal records. A 200-year question emerged. Should the highest court remain the only one unpunished for broken rules? Within the court, ripples spread. Justice Kagan noted in a dissent, "Broken trust isn't fixed by news cycles. It demands repair." Justice Jackson, newer, bold, got more law school speaking invites, especially from students who saw the hearing online and felt justice shouldn't be so distant. Carter wrote fewer opinions. His name faded from majorities. His once sharp voice in arguments grew cautious, hesitant. He stopped interrupting. Maybe he was strategizing. Maybe tired. Or, as a former clerk told Politico, he saw the robe doesn't hide all. Yet he remained, voting, shaping lives. That's American power. It doesn't vanish, it wears down. Every wearing begins with someone saying enough. That was Elizabeth Harper. Without gavel, robe, or grand office, she had something lasting. Proof, not just of corruption, but of vision, a voice that breached democracy's strongest chamber and made it pause. In a nation dulled by power's impunity, that pause was a start. Not revolution, but a crack in the marble, unyielding. It should have ended with the cameras, the assumption went. Applause would wane. The moment would shrink to transcripts, clips, essays. Elizabeth Harper would revert to a freshman congresswoman, sharp but consumed by a system that outlives challengers. But it didn't. Something in that room didn't just unmask a man. It unleashed something. It started quietly in overlooked places. An Alabama courthouse where a young black defender taped Elizabeth's words to her clipboard. Justice isn't carved in stone. It's the silenced speaking. A Minnesota classroom where a jaded civics teacher played the hearing, saying, "This is the lesson they didn't write." An Arizona shelter where a mother with a silent felony whispered, "She spoke for people like me." Elizabeth didn't give a battle cry or pledge reform. She didn't fuel outrage. She offered something riskier to power, acknowledgement. She voiced what many felt, that justice no longer resembled them, speaking a tongue only privilege understood. They responded. Emails swamped her office, thousands hourly, not from insiders, but from unknowns. A Michigan welder, a Houston nurse, a Newark retiree who wrote, "I lived long enough to hear it said." Her staff added servers for the flood. Volunteers sorted letters, torn paper, napkins, one on a receipt's back. All started. Thank you. The public wasn't alone. In government halls, a quieter shift began. Judges re-examined disclosures. Clerks murmured of recusal memos now unavoidable. An Oregon state justice resigned abruptly, citing personal reasons. Insiders knew. Timing too sharp, pressure too fresh, silence too loud. One morning, Elizabeth got an unmarked package. Inside, a framed black and white photo. A 1965 Mississippi courtroom. A black woman escorted out for speaking uncalled. A note. "You entered so we could rise." No name, just initials. ER. Elizabeth hung it across from the Constitution. As a symbol, she stayed herself. She rode the early train solo, stopped at her DC cafe, where the barista grinned but charged full price, took late calls from her district, worries of rent, ahs, potholes. Power touched her, but didn't root. She forbade it. One evening, near the Library of Congress, she paused at a crosswalk. A girl, 17 or 18, approached, book clutched. "Are you?" Elizabeth nodded. "Yes." No selfie or signature asked. "I saw you," the girl said. "I didn't think someone like you could be there." Elizabeth smiled. "Neither did I, until I was." The light changed. They crossed. Two figures in a city grappling with truth. Carter stayed silent. No statements, no interviews. His appearances dwindled, his opinions quieter. The court couldn't censure him. The Constitution barred it. But the world shifted. His rulings carried public doubt. His words were dissected for bias. He was a justice, but not untouchable. Elizabeth didn't strip his robe. She made it see-through, and the marble no longer hid that room's memory. Awakened memory doesn't rest. 2 months later, Howard Law School invited Elizabeth to speak. She declined twice, unready. The third, she agreed. No script. She faced young black and brown students and said, "You don't need a loud voice to shake a system. Just say what others won't and mean it." The room hushed, then stood, not for her role or politics, but her courage, once deemed insufficient, now undeniable. That night in her apartment, her phone buzzed. A stranger's message. "They tried to bury your voice. It was a root." She stared, then set it down. No tweet, no reply. She sat in silence, letting the words settle. True. Her voice wasn't fleeting. It wasn't just a hearing, judge, or vote. It was something silence, robes, or time couldn't bury. Truth, spoken bravely, doesn't echo. It grows. It was everywhere. The words landed. The echo became a voice. Elizabeth's voice did what few thought possible. It pierced marble. After headlines faded, hashtags slowed, and room 2141's lights dimmed, a deeper truth lingered. Not on signs or clips, not in sound bites or laws. It lived in those who saw themselves facing power, unblinking. This wasn't just corruption's tale. It was about silence. Power needs, and those who break it. The lesson wasn't at the mic or in bills. It was in what followed. Elizabeth walking alone to her office, past portraits of men who shaped law without surviving it. It was her breath before facing voices saying she'd overstepped, should have stayed small, followed rules. But she knew the powerless first rule. Rules weren't made for you. Yet she stood. That's this story's first truth. Power guards itself with ritual, but justice needs upheaval. When institutions swap transparency for tradition, they decay inside. When robes turn to armor, titles to shields, the served aren't protected. They're subdued. Elizabeth refused subduing. She rejected silence as respect. She showed a nation that respect without accountability reveres the wrong. The second truth is riskier, human. Justice doesn't fall suddenly. It erodes softly. A meal unreported, a vote unrecused, a ticket unquestioned, a flag raised when none should see. It's slow, below outrage's radar. When visible, it's built into the system. Elizabeth didn't just show cracks. She revealed their hidden design. The cost, exposing the long hidden, doesn't just meet pushback, it meets erasure. They called her theatrical, unprofessional, unfit, angry. She never shouted. She raised stakes. That terrified most, for in a world teaching her kind to endure quietly, a woman unmoved when the system quakes is the loudest sound. The third lesson, most painful. Truth isn't enough, not in power's halls, courts, or public opinion. Elizabeth presented facts, receipts, recordings, a case stronger than many convictions. No resignation came. No robe fell. The system didn't break. It adjusted, tightened. Yet she didn't fail. Justice isn't always tomorrow's change. Sometimes it's what can't be unseen. A generation saw that hearing. They saw justice waver, the mask fall, power's proximity not demanding submission. That quiet, mighty, permanent shift is change's start. They reduced Elizabeth to one voice because one voice, driven by clarity, memory, loss, by a home where law was threat, by holding her mother's indictment, terrifies a broken system most. Elizabeth spoke because no one did when it counted. She became the voice for those still voiceless. That's this story's human lesson. Truth needs no permission, only courage to face its cost. Thank you for staying to this moment, for joining this justice journey. Your support is everything. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications to catch what's next. Share your thoughts below. What stirred you most in this story?